One of the most innocuous, but possibly one of the most important questions in software engineering is how much and how long is it going to take? And it's possibly one of the most difficult questions for us to ask. This is bringing up the whole topic of estimation. The reason this question is so important is because it is the economic question. Is it worth it for us to fund this project? How much is it going to cost? And can it be done in a timely manner for us? So typically our estimation algorithm that we've used historically from the early days of software development have been to first ask the question, how big is it? And in the early days, we would use some kind of predictor to estimate the size of a software system. One of the oldest is how many source lines of code, the case log. So how many thousands of source lines of code is this system going to be? Some more adventurous people, realizing that source lines of code probably wasn't a great estimator, started thinking about function points and module counts. So was a large number of different approaches to coming up with some count or some number that represented how big is this system. So how much work will there potentially be for it? What's the number of size in terms of either source lines of code, function points, module counts, or some other metric that we could use that would capture the size of the system. Then what we did is once we understood how big the system was going to be, we would run it through some kind of function that would convert that size into both an effort and into a duration. So for example, if you estimated your system in terms of thousands of source lines of code, the effort, you would say, is, okay, we know that for us to produce a line of code takes an hour and a half. This is a thousand hours worth of work, so therefore it will take us 1,500 hours to develop this system. And then the duration would be, well, given how many people are we going to have and number of hours, out of that formula would pop how long the project would take. So you could look at a project as it's going to be effort-wise this many staff months, and if we have X number of people, then we can deliver it in these calendar months. So that was typically the way we've estimated probably since the beginning of software development. Now, one thing I want to emphasize here is I talked about size, we measuring in source lines of code or module counts or function points. What I've seen a lot of people do is jump directly to sizing in hours. Okay, size is not hours. What effectively people are doing when they're asked for an estimate, they'll say, oh, the size of this is 200 hours. They've basically conflated sizing and coming up with the effort. And I think that's a bad policy because now what happens is that number of hours becomes a target. And also it's very much like the days when we went to school and we would come up with the answer and then the teacher would not give us any marks because they would say, well, you didn't show your work. So a lot of people are skipping that first step of coming up with the size and then coming up with the effort in hours. So this is something I want to caution against right here because it'll make understanding Agile estimation a little bit difficult otherwise. Now, standard or traditional estimating was always based on using some metric like source lines of code or function points or module counts. And there was some absolute measure. There was an absolute, we knew what a source line of code was, or at least we thought we knew what a source line of code was, and therefore we could count. Or we knew what a function point was and we could count. And we would come up with an absolute number that would represent any system. Where Agile estimation, or what the estimation technique that's been adopted in the Agile world, is to use relative estimating. In other words, what we're doing is we're coming up with that first step, the size of the system, by comparing a new system to an existing one and asking the question, is this new system bigger, the same size, or smaller than something we've done in the past. This is quite a radical break from what we would normally think of an estimation technique, but it's also got a wonderful approach to it. It is a neat way to actually get you to do estimation using historical data. And we all know that the only true, reasonable way to come up with a reasonably accurate estimate is to actually compare your work to something you've done in the past, to use historical data. So I often like to think of relative estimating as advocated in the Agile world as really a simple trick to get you to use your historical data. So relative estimating comes down to this formula now. When we ask the question, how big is it? We take the new system and we compare it to the existing systems. And we say, is it bigger, smaller? And we come up with a measure in terms of sometimes what's referred to as t-shirt sizes, or we come up with points. And then when we want to convert it into how much time will this take and how long is it, we actually use something called velocity, which is a measured metric of how fast can the teams we have deliver on a t-shirt size or a point. So this is the approach that's used in the Agile world. It's actually to do relative sizing, which leverages our historical knowledge of projects and work that we've done before to forecast how much and how long will our efforts take.